Let's get into it here on Outnumbered. My co-hosts, Emily Compagno, Kayleigh McEnany, also with us, Dagan McDowell, and in the virtual center seat today, Lawrence Jones. A lot there, Lawrence. I do think that it's worth mentioning that he already anticipates this fight. And it's also worth mentioning that some of the criticism starts with, well, what does this do to make us safer? Exactly.
Well, yeah, that's the big question. And I've been jotting down notes throughout his entire speech. First of all, I don't think it's appropriate to start off this conversation by saying it's a hobby of yours. But since he used those words, I would think that the President of the United States would be educated on the issue. He honed in on 3 cases. He talked about Stoneman Douglas. He talked about Pulse nightclub and Sandy Hook. Well, Stoneman Douglas and the Pulse nightclub, they were warned. The FBI was warned about this. So these red flags that he was alluding to, if they directly notified the FBI, what more flags would have done to stop those killers? So that's one case. He also talked about Sandy Hook. As you know, this perpetrator killed his own mother. He could not purchase his own gun. He stole that gun from his mother after assassinating his own mother. There was no red flags were there. He did not legally have to purchase a firearm. He stole that firearm. So that's another thing right there. He talked about immunity to the gun stores, for the gun stores. Now, do you want to hold gun stores accountable for the actions of other people? Now, it's one thing if they illegally sell a gun to someone. I think all Americans would agree that there's some criminal liability for that. But if someone's decide to carry out this attack and they had no idea they legally sold the gun to them, that doesn't make sense to me. Last thing is, I know this is something minor, but I think it's appropriate since we're having the conversation. If you're going to talk about the ATF, maybe you should say the name right. It's not the ATE. Okay. You know, and lastly, Harris, as someone that lives in New York City and is from the state of Texas, I feel less safe here. Criminals are out of control here. They have talked about defunding the police. Cops are back away, and I don't have a firearm in this city to defend myself. So a lot to unpack. I know I just threw a lot out there, but I think the guy that is the president should know a lot of this stuff.
So this is interesting. So you know what? While you were taking notes, I was working with the team on getting, not from the weekend, because we know the numbers of shootings and deaths in Chicago, Illinois, as we get closer to the summer, they pop every weekend. But just on Monday and Tuesday alone of this week, shootings 35, deaths 7. And why do we mention that? Because I have the guest list, and I see who's in the Rose Garden. There were a lot of people who were clapping. I just wonder how many of those people are having these types of spikes, particularly during the pandemic, and what they would say is on this list that would make a difference in their cities. I mean, wouldn't they already be doing them? Kayleigh, I come to you.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Harris. And I think you just hit on, to me, what was the most important takeaway. There were a number of red herrings there. Him pointing to things, saying they'd fix the problem when they wouldn't. They're meant to distract. But for you to mention crime on the street, I think this is so important because we in the Trump White House would constantly bring up in Democrat-controlled streets, we are seeing crime go up, and it is a travesty for these urban communities. It was nice to finally hear a Democrat admit to that today, that in fact in these urban communities they're seeing this increase. But guess what? None of this gun legislation would fix any of that because Department of Justice data tells us 90% of crimes committed with guns by inmates are committed with guns that are already illegal. So none of this would do anything, be it the Charleston loophole he mentions. That's imaginary. That doesn't exist. The FBI had a data entry problem. There was no loophole. The gun show loophole he mentions, if you are an FFL, someone who sells a firearm, you still have to go through a background check no matter where you sell it. So these are all red herrings, and it ignores the people like Legend Taliaferro, the little boy who lost his life laying in his bed because of crime in the streets, because it avoids the real problem, which the Trump administration just quickly, with Operation Legend, partnered with local communities, locked some of these people up. That changes things, not to fund the police and imaginary gun changes.
All right, so there was something on the list. I had on Joey Jones, you know, Fox contributor, also a former bomb technician for the Marines, so he knows munitions. And he said, you know, one of the false flags in all of this is how much politics are not being talked about. But there's a lot of politics on Joe Biden's list. He points to something called ghost guns. Did you notice that's where the president first started? With ghost guns, things that people can manufacture on their own. I want to listen from Joey, and then Dagan, I'm coming to you.
So you can buy a block